Ruby, Arizona. Bodie, California. Shakespeare, New Mexico. Silver Plume, Colorado. All places of murder, hangings, every form of human depravity and suffering. The blood that stained America's Old West still pulses through its decaying towns. Ghosts and spirits haunt the desolate streets they once walked, demanding to have their stories told.
I have been in places where I felt I wasn't alone when I knew I was. But that's, no, chalk it up to anything. As I wrote in my book, Holden Caulfield says the movies can kill you. You know, I just think it's that spooky feeling.
But why? Why do so many of these restless souls remain? What are their stories? What makes these ghost towns so haunted? As cemeteries filled with the bodies of the deceased, their stories spread and their legends grew. These beautiful ghost towns of the Wild West are full of unique history and stories of hauntings by spirits from the past. Stories that must not be forgotten. Join us as we set out to discover the truth behind these supernatural hauntings. Left to die by modern civilization, these ghost towns were once booming mining centers, lawless and rough. The streets lined with seedy brothels, dusty saloons, and opium dens. Places that were home to prospectors and ruthless outlaws. 3 stories emerge from these ruins. First, the buildings themselves tell the story of the rise and falls of the community of people. Then, there are the stories, verbal histories, and the events that took place there. And finally, there are the cases of the paranormal that arose from these stories. Traces of people and events that linger just as much as the buildings. These 3 types of stories are interwoven and capture a lost piece of Americana. That part of the Wild West that came and went in the blink of an eye. That part of the Wild West that can be seen in any cowboy movie ever made. The mining town. The 1848 discovery of gold at Sutter's Mill in the western Sierra foothills began California's gold rush. In the hopes of becoming rich, it lured prospectors from all over the United States and beyond. Most didn't strike it rich, but it did set in motion a wave of gold and silver mining fever. A fever which would spread across the West, leaving in its wake one ghost town after another. One of the largest and oldest is Bodie. This former gold mining town is plagued by a centuries-old curse and reports of ghostly apparitions lurking in its shadows. Those who dare to visit often report encounters of the supernatural. In 1857, a group of prospectors located a new promising gold deposit on the eastern side of the Sierra foothills. One of those men was named Waterman S. Bodie. a well-respected prospector from Poughkeepsie, New York. While making a supply trip that November, Bodie got lost in a blizzard and froze to death. His cold, lifeless body was recovered in the spring, and, in a twist of fate, he never got to see the rise of the town that was named after him. Philip Varney, the author of many ghost town guidebooks and an authority on the subject, tells the story.
Bodie is the king of the ghost towns in the western United States. Nothing rivals it, as far as I'm concerned. It has dozens of buildings. It had hundreds of buildings, but it has dozens of buildings in an absolutely gorgeous setting. It's at over 8,000 feet elevation, which means that it has limited accessibility, but it also means that it is up in some starkly beautiful country.
Scores of people were killed during Bodie's wild gold rush era, some due to bullets, others to accidents and poor living conditions. As Bodie slipped further and further into decay, the legends of ghosts and curses began to grow. Dave Alexander, owner-operations manager of legendsofamerica.com, explains.
A few of the residents of Bodie remained until after World War II, when the final mine shut down and most of the population left. About 6 residents remained, though, and about 5 of them would meet some untimely deaths. A man killed his wife, and then 3 other residents killed the man for murdering his wife. And it's said that, legend has it anyway, that the ghost of the murdered man wound up haunting the 3 other that killed him, and they would die soon after of unnatural disease.
One man died from a grisly gash in his face, another from a hemorrhage that caused his head to swell up. The third man disappeared and was found dead in a ravine. Murders and strange deaths aren't the only things that have plagued Bodie.
The Bodie curse, which states that if you take even one item from the ghost town of Bodie, bad luck is coming your way. Now, a lot of people say that the Bodie curse was created by the park rangers to make sure that nothing left the park, but I can tell you that they believe in it. The park rangers actually keep a log book of the people who have returned items, and there's several letters that the museum holds to this day from people who have written about their experience of taking an item and then having to bring it back.
One of these letters, from 1994, is addressed, "Dear Bodie Spirits. I am sorry. 1 year ago, around the 4th of July, I was visiting the ghost town. I had been there many times before, but had always followed the regulations about collecting. This trip was different. I collected some items here and there and brought them home. I was a visitor again this year, and while I was in the museum, I read the letters of others who had collected things and had bad luck. I started to think about the car accident, the loss of my job, my continuing illness, and other bad things that have haunted me for the past year since my visit in violation. I am generally not superstitious, but please find enclosed the collectibles I just couldn't live without, and ask the spirits to see my regret. Signed, one with a very guilty conscience." Another letter from 1992 states, "Having taken a nail from Bodie, life since then has been a steady downward slide. It's possible that all the unpleasant events of the past 9 months are a coincidence, but just in case the Bodie curse is real, I am returning the nail." It's possible that curses are linked to ghosts who may hold a grudge. It stands within reason that an object, building, or an entire town could be cursed by an angry spirit that still carries out its retribution against anybody who disturbs it. Bodie isn't the only town afflicted with the secrets of the past that could lead to danger for the modern visitor. Today, if you dare, Ruby, Arizona is one of the most dangerous western ghost towns to reach. Reach along a network of winding dirt roads where battles between the Border Patrol, drug smugglers, and illegal immigrants still play out along the Mexican-Arizona border. Entrance is by invitation only, but once there, the reward is enormous. You can freely walk through what ghost town experts say is the most complete deserted ghost town. It's possible to explore a number of its preserved old buildings. The school, of course. Teachers' houses. In a maze of spooky, narrow hallways. A piano, its keys still echoing into the silence, and there are even reports of a mysterious, shadowy figure. Today, only a few ghost hunters have ventured into Ruby, with good reason. Besides the real and present danger, like Bodhi, there is talk of a curse that's resulted in what's known as the Ruby Murders and the troubled spirits haunting the town. By 1920, the town was considered one of the most perilous in Arizona. When the mercantile was sold to John and Alexander Fraser, they ignored the warnings of bandits. The brothers were soon found shot dead in a robbery of their store. One old-time local told a law enforcement investigator of the case that there was a curse on the mercantile, the place that was the core of Ruby. He said, "Old Tio Pedro died years ago. He predicted evil for the occupants of the post office because it was built over an old padre's grave." The investigator confirmed with the local peace officer that the legend was indeed common knowledge among the Mexicans of the area. And the curse of the mercantile ownership didn't stop there. The second incident occurred in August 1921. The current caretaker of Ruby, Michael, is familiar with the events that took place.
That place, that little room there in the hills, the old mercantile, that was a store. Twice, Mexican bandits came up. They murdered several people each time, both owners, wives, relatives that were visiting. They actually pulled the teeth out of the women's mouth, gold teeth, and that was how they got caught once. They were in a bar trying to sell these gold teeth, and the sheriff happened to be sitting in the corner having a brew and saw him trying to sell the teeth, and that's how they got caught.
Everything led to Manuel Martinez and Placidio Silvas, and the two were brought to trial. But this was not the end of the Ruby murders. Cruz County Sheriff George White and Deputy L.A. Smith loaded the prisoners to take them to the Florence State Penitentiary, but they were soon found dead on the side of the road. Over 700 citizens, enraged by the third double murder, gathered into the most extensive manhunt in the history of the Southwest. Finally, the two convicts were located. On August 10, 1923, Martinez was hanged. Silvas was sent to prison for life, but in 1928, he escaped the penitentiary and was never seen again. With all the bloodshed, is it any wonder that cursed Ruby is considered to be haunted?
Sometimes parapsychologists will come out and they'll set up scientific equipment, high-gain microphones, electromagnetic sensors, to see if they can find some evidence of the tragedies that happened at the building. And they've said they've got some very unusual anomalous results.
The Ruby murders weren't the only instances of unusual death. The other place of paranormal activity is in the ruins of the mining office complex, a complex that contains the remains of the assayer's office.
The place that we've had, that there was a tragedy here at Ruby, was up on the hill in the assay office. The assay office is where they would analyze the core samples to determine where the highest concentration of ore was. And there's a lot of chemicals to do that testing. And the chemist, his wife had an affair, and he found out about it. So he went up to the office and mixed himself a little cocktail and chugged it on down and killed himself.
The Mercantile and Post Office closed for good on May 31st, 1941. For those who visit Ruby, the cursed spirits of the dead remain. In the old school, you may feel like you've been hit in the chest by a presence. In the teacher's house, you may hear phantom footsteps, and by the collapsed Mercantile, you may see the ghosts of John and Alexander Fraser, or Frank and Myrtle Pearson. As soon as you step foot in Ruby, you can feel the old curse which has permeated the whole town. The gruesome events of murder and death still linger, the spirits waiting for justice. If you ever venture into Ruby, beware of the old Tio Pedro's warning. When spirits remain after a traumatic end, as with the Ruby murders, they can remain earthbound, forever searching for peace in order to cross over. Such is the case with the next two towns, South Pass City, Wyoming, and Bannack, Montana. Ghost town historian Kathy Weiser describes Bannack.
In July 1862, a group of prospectors from Colorado who called themselves the Pikes Peakers were doing a little prospecting in Montana in what was what they called Grasshopper Creek because of the sheer numbers of grasshoppers that were there at the time. And they found gold. Just like all of the many other mining rushes, it didn't take long for word to get around. The gold that they found was 99.5% pure, with some of the richest gold that's ever been found in the United States. So it brought the people running. Within just a couple of months, there were about 400 prospectors working the hills around what would become Bannack.
The mining town was named for the Bannack Indians and is located in southwestern Montana near the town of Dillon. At its peak, Bannack had 10,000 inhabitants, 3 hotels, 3 bakeries, 3 blacksmith shops, 2 stables, 2 meat markets, a grocery store, a restaurant, a brewery, a billiard hall, 4 saloons, and a Masonic lodge. After this glorious start, it took nearly 100 years for Bannack to go from boomtown to ghost town. That long period of mining activity has given Bannack a wonderful sense of permanence.
They have protected the best ghost towns in Montana, and they're well worth protecting. First and foremost is Bannack. Bannack was the first real town in Montana, and it would have been very easy to have lost this town to looters because a lot of the buildings were well made and it's been protected. And a nice thing about it is you have to leave your car behind. So when you walk into Bannack, you are walking away from the 21st century and back into the 19th.
As you enter this Western time capsule, one of the first things you notice is that Bannack is one long main street with buildings on both sides. There is something else to notice about the buildings of Bannack.
What happens with any ghost town or any mining camp is that the first people who are there are just putting up tent cities. If the prospects seem good enough, people start building wooden buildings. Well, the real sign of prosperity is when they start building brick buildings, because naturally that means they intend to stay for a long time. And Bannack has excellent examples of all of those. There are just old log cabins, there are board and batten homes, and there is what was the courthouse and is now the Hotel Meade, which is an absolutely wonderful building.
Built in 1875, the county courthouse was supposed to serve as the legal and political center of the region, but it fell on hard times when the railroad missed Bannack. In 1881, only 6 years after its completion, the residents of the county voted to shift the territorial legislature to Dillon. For 10 years, the building remained empty until Dr. John Singleton purchased it and turned it into the center of social activity of Bannack, finally closing in 1940. It is also one of the most haunted buildings in Bannack.
A park ranger told me an amazing story about a little girl. There was a story of her father was working across the creek, and she had the standard thing for her to do was to take lunch to her father. And one time she went and the creek was running fast, and she drowned. She was buried in her favorite dress, and as I recall, it's a red dress. And I was being told this by a park ranger, a woman who said, I have never gone up to the second floor of this Mead Hotel because there was a Japanese tourist who went upstairs and came down and said, why is a little girl in a red dress up there? And she said she just shuddered because, of course, she saw no possible way that this gentleman could know about this story of a ghost, of the little girl who died, who drowned. She said, I'm not ever going up there.
Later on, after the major gold rush had fallen by the wayside, they brought in gold dredges later, like in the early 1900s, to work the tailings. And unfortunately, those dredges destroyed several existing buildings that still stood at the time. It also took the life of a young girl. Why she's said to be seen in the old courthouse / Hotel Mead is unknown. But she's been seen in there by hundreds of visitors for more than a century. So evidently she's been there since shortly after she died.
Today, the manifestation of the girl is mostly seen by children. When she first passed, she appeared to her frightened best friend who had witnessed her drowning. Her ghostly face has been seen looking out of the windows of the hotel, in the guest rooms, and in the front room with the balcony. The hotel has also trapped the spirit of an older woman that haunts the second floor. Then there are the cries of children that echo through the halls, who suffered a terrible death when the building was a hospital. Across the street from the hotel is the other grand building of Bannack.
There is also a terrific combination Masonic lodge and schoolhouse. The Masons offered to build in Bannack a meeting house, as obviously they do, but they offered to have the first floor to be a schoolhouse. In the West, lots of lodge buildings are on this. The meeting place is on the second floor, and usually below it is a commercial enterprise. In this particular place, it's the only place I know of like this. It was a schoolhouse, and you can go into the schoolhouse and you can look through a plastic second story. You go up a second story and you can look through a plastic window thing, and you can see the appurtenances of the Masonic order up there as well.
The other place of note is the Bissett House, haunted by the many children that died there while in quarantine from epidemics of typhoid, diphtheria, and smallpox. And then there was the dismal tale of Henry Plummer. The three Montana boomtowns, Bannack, Virginia City, and Nevada City, are united in one of the Wild West's greatest outlaw stories and legends. It is the story of the Montana Vigilantes, a story of vigilantes, ordinary citizens who took the law into their own hands during the Civil War. The story revolves around Bannack's sheriff, Henry Plummer, and his men. As the vigilantes began rounding up Plummer's posse, Kathy Weiser tells the infamous story that began nearly 150 years ago with robberies and deaths along the stagecoach route between Bannock and Virginia City.
In 1863, more than 100 men were murdered. That's how bad the lawlessness in the area had become. There were all kinds of rumors about who were the road agents. This was obviously a gang. This was obviously a very organized gang, and somebody who seemed to know what was going on, when the shipments were taking place, when they were leaving, what was going to be in those shipments, because voila, it was always the big ones that seemed to be targeted.
I want you to go inside. You need to write a letter. You make your peace with your maker.
Rumors started to circulate that perhaps
Men back to Virginia.
those in the know, maybe law enforcement itself, might be behind this. But nothing was done of it at that time. Henry Plummer was also made a United States deputy in August 1863, putting him even more in the know. Could he be behind this group, this gang, which were called the Innocents?
And I'm going to vote first. Walk over with me.
The people of Bannock and Virginia City had finally had enough. And they formed, in December of that year, what was called the Montana Vigilantes. The Montana Vigilantes would not only operate in Bannock and Virginia City, but would operate across the state for several years, taking care of justice in their own way, often brutally.
Captain Williams, it's murder!
You know what happened with Gillian?
In the next several weeks alone, 24 men were hanged by those vigilantes in just 2 weeks. One of the last of those 24 was a man by the name of Red Yeager, Erastus, nickname Red Yeager.
Let me go with you. Put me in chains and let me go with you while you catch the rest of them and hang them. I'd like to see them all hanged for putting me in this position. Step to the back of the stool, Red. You know you've got to count.
Like other men who are getting ready to face their deaths, he began to beg. He'd give up anything. He'd give up any kind of information. And he pointed the finger at who? None other than Sheriff Henry Plummer.
On June 10th, 1864, Henry Plummer shared the fate of his posse at the gallows. Many believe there are such things as earthbound spirits, spirits that did not properly pass over. Some may have met a sudden, untimely death and remain confused after their passing, trying to communicate with anyone that is sensitive to the paranormal. Others realize they are dead and are afraid to go towards the light. And others stay behind in order to take care of unfinished business.
Sheriff Plummer himself might just be hanging about the town, trying somehow to clear his name. And interestingly enough, most historians today, they don't think that Sheriff Plummer was guilty. And the reason why is because everything continued. The crime continued even after Plummer and his men were hanged. Why? They think, historians agree today, that it was the vigilantes themselves.
Most ghost hunters believe Henry Plummer's spirit has unfinished business still trying to prove his innocence. Perhaps you should pay a visit to Bannock and seek him out. He's been waiting for a long time for someone to believe his story. In the case of South Pass City, Wyoming, the souls of those who died here may still remain due to their sudden, violent death.
One thing that I find very interesting about South Pass is that the state of Wyoming actually purchased the town as a 75th anniversary present for the state. And today it's maintained and provides some wonderful summer tourist activities, including many walking tours, where you can still see many of the original buildings. 30,000 artifacts from the original town still remain. So I think, you know, as far as a ghost town being preserved, Wyoming has done a wonderful job with South Pass.
South Pass City is one of the few mining ghost towns in the Rocky Mountains that's actually on the plains, because the high peaks of the Rockies disappear between the Colorado-Wyoming border and the Grand Tetons to the northwest. This ghost town was first established as a stage station on the Oregon Trail along the South Pass. It's ironic for many of the travelers heading west to the goldfields of California. Ironic because they could have gone no further. Gold was under their feet. In 1867, the discovery of the Carissa lode and hundreds of other promising gold strikes turned the area into a booming mining district. People by the thousands poured in, with South Pass City forming the population core. In fact, it was the second city to be incorporated in the state of Wyoming. Then, 20 years later, the boom was over. Today, South Pass City gives the ghost town hunter the best chance to experience what a mining boomtown was like. It is a town that offers every possible perspective, from picturesque overviews from the surrounding hills that give the lay of the town, to a walk down Main Street, to explorations of buildings, to the historic Wolverine Mine just north of the town. Though this mine was never a big producer, it provides an experience of the darkened, close atmosphere of the typical gold mine. Nearby, one can get a good look at a stamp mill, the huge machine that crushed the gold-bearing rock in preparation for processing. Wandering through the town, there is a feeling of unrest from the spirits of past residents. Indian attacks occurred quite frequently. South Pass was in the middle of the Great Indian Wars, and in 1873, Sioux and Cheyenne warriors learned that there were only about 50 residents left in the town. White settlers and ranchers had been taking over their tribal hunting grounds for years, and now it was a chance to make them pay. The warriors rode in and brutally murdered the rest of the residents, one after another. As is often the case with sudden violent death, the spirits of those killed are said to still remain. In the early 1900s, the town was purchased by the Wilmer family after experiencing strange occurrences, possibly from that of the murdered residents. It became too much to handle, and they sold it to the state of Wyoming. Finally, in the 1980s, it went into the hands of Tom and Nancy Johnson, who wanted to get to the bottom of this ghost business. They came into contact with a paranormal group that began a ghost hunt in 1993. They discovered unexplained lights coming from the buildings, strange figures, and spikes in electromagnetic energy in reply to the questions they asked. When a spirit is able to communicate and interact with a living person, this is known as an intelligent haunting. A possible explanation is the life energy of those past may still be trapped in South Pass City's buildings, and personal items still remaining in the town.
It has several buildings, including the Carissa Saloon, so named for the mine it's still up the hill. And incidentally, I don't think it's open yet, but the Carissa mine will be open for tours eventually, and it might be open by the time you are seeing this. But in the town itself, there are hotels, saloons, lots of memorabilia.
A haunted object or spirit attachment could mean an entity has an emotional or spiritual attachment to a piece, and that energy is then transferred or absorbed by the object in cases of traumatic death. It could also mean that once a person has died, their energy may want to revisit the object which they held so dear. This could be why so many who visit are immediately attuned to the restless souls of those killed in the Indian raid. Next is another town that was hit by grim Indian raids and contains a building with spirit attachments. Nestled in the narrow confines of Silver Creek Canyon in southeastern New Mexico, Megargle is a ghost hunter's paradise. Its ruins shimmer a rich patina of age, and it is one of the most eerie ghost towns in the West. As we wound our way up the narrow mountain road to Megargle, we get a first glance at the Little Fanny Mine, a distant mine giving us a great sense of isolation. The air was thick with grief for all those who lost their lives here. The town was quiet, the tragedies of the past all but forgotten by the outside world. The Megargle mines, when it came to gold and silver, were perhaps the most productive in the state. Indeed, Megargle, at its peak around 1915, had a population of around 1,500. It had electricity, water, and telephone facilities. 300 children were going to school. There were 4 merchandise stores, 5 saloons, 2 restaurants, a hospital with 3 physicians, and of course, 2 red light districts. 15 years later, the population had dropped to less than 200 residents. Because of its location, Megargle was doomed by several tragic events of unexpected mass death. In the early days, the town was subject to frequent attacks by nearby Apache Indians, whose raids killed many residents. Then, 2 devastating fires occurred, destroying homes, taking many lives. More people lost their life during the fire in 1942, a fire that almost completely wiped out the town. But somehow, some still survived. Finally, there came several terrible floods as Silver Creek's banks overflowed and washed away bridges, houses, and people. Sadly, these sudden and tragic deaths of those unnamed people are now lost to the winds of time. However, the presence of their souls are perhaps still trapped in the narrow canyon of Megargle. This strange place was also shattered by tragedy in 1912 when 2 Mexican bandits, armed with Winchesters, entered the general store. The owner, C.A. Freeman, and his clerk, William Clark, were shot and fell dead to the floor. 100 years later, their ghosts are said to still haunt the general store in a classic spirit attachment. In the haunted town of Garnett, Montana, one of our cameramen had an experience with a ghost and a spirit-attached object, a mirror.
I've probably filmed 20, 25 ghost towns over the last 3 or 4 years. I'm not one of these people who experiences the paranormal. Normally, I'm pretty stable. I don't ever feel anything, but we arrived in Garnett, Montana, which is really early in the morning because we wanted to get there before it filled up with tourists. And we got there, and my other cameraman and I, we started working over the different buildings. And I went into the boarding house, which was totally empty. I was there all by myself. And I worked my way up the stairs and began filming in these rooms filled with old beds and things that people might have used when they were staying overnight. And when I was filming, I looked in this mirror, which you can see right here. And as plain as day, there was a cowboy looking at me. He was in his 30s. He wasn't poorly dressed or well dressed. He had a slight beard. He wasn't threatening, but he was clearly a person I could see him as plain as day. And I swung around, to see who was behind me, and there was nobody there.
There are many other stories of a paranormal presence here. Caretakers and individuals who were there when the streets were deserted have reported unexplained footsteps, doors shutting, music and laughter in the abandoned town of Garnet. So many experiences that the park rangers are forbidden to talk about them. Garnet is one of the few ghost towns that can be viewed from above. It is said that when people listen closely at dusk, they can clearly hear the town come alive in an eerie chorus of sounds. That's only a small part of its haunting. Named for the semi-precious stone found in nearby rocks, Garnet became a booming gold town in the late 1890s.
This was a gold town that they knew gold was there, but it was overlooked because great strikes were found in Idaho, up in the Panhandle, as they call it. I think of it as a chimney. And miners deserted the place. Well, eventually they came back, and Garnet became a fairly short-lived, but still wonderful little town.
Like every other boom town, Garnet had many saloons where drinking, gambling, and prostitution were rampant. But they had a unique way to deal with these issues.
It was a miners' union town, and there was no real constable or sheriff. Disputes, illegalities, and so forth were brought up to the miners' union. And the justice meted out was quite simple. You could make a very good living here. Keep doing what you're doing, and you're out. And so there was a kind of self-discipline in the town. There's a jail, but it's very small. And the miners' union was really responsible for the kind of law-abiding quality of it. There's a wonderful two-story hotel there, and you can it has stuff in it. It's not the original furniture and so forth, but there are dining tables. The kitchen is still there. The stove, I think, is probably an original. It looks like it would be very difficult to have moved in and out. On the second floor, there are dusty old mining the quarters in the hotel. So there's old furniture and so forth. A dressmaker's dummy, for example, is in one of them. And the overall effect of Garnet is absolutely terrific.
The state of Montana decided to preserve Garnet in the mid-1970s. That's when workers and caretakers started to hear the eerie and shadowy sounds of horses and wagons. But when they looked, there were none. At Kelly's Saloon, just after midnight, disembodied laughter and sounds of music are reportedly heard as the spirits dance in the shadows, and men's voices echo from the empty rooms. Caretakers also report hearing unexplained footsteps in the Old Wells Hotel, as well as doors slamming shut, even in places where no doors were present. These sounds could be heard day or night in the town or above it. Those who've experienced these unexplained sounds confirm that as soon as you approach the building, the noises stop. Winter visitors report seeing ghostly apparitions wearing old-fashioned clothing, walking the empty streets, and footprints in the fresh snow leading into buildings, but never coming out. There are several reports of a mysterious woman being seen in the upstairs rooms of the hotel, gazing out of the window, sending chills up the spine of whoever makes eye contact with her. The mountains surrounding Garnet are rich in gold-bearing quartz crystals. It's believed that these crystal deposits can hold information, such as an event in history. When this information is discharged, a residual haunting may occur. If someone releases a large amount of energy or emotion in a location, that energy can attach or imprint itself. The energy can then be experienced by individuals in the future like a recording of past events. Full body or partial apparitions might be seen, and music, voices, or other sounds might be heard. In these cases, activity does not respond to or interact with the living. The event simply plays out as it was imprinted, oftentimes attached to a specific location or building. This type of residual haunting is present in another ghost town, White Oaks, New Mexico. White Oaks is located on the outskirts of the Lincoln National Forest. It became a boomtown in 1879 following the discovery of gold and coal in the nearby Hickory Mountains. At its peak, in 1890, White Oaks had a population of 2,000 people, an opera house, several saloons, general stores, a school, and a town hall. During its heyday, it had a dark side. There were brothels, and the town was a haven for cattle rustlers and outlaws, including Billy the Kid, who found its dens of iniquity to his liking. Billy and his gang often targeted cattle near White Oaks. After one attempted theft, citizens from White Oaks formed a posse and went out after the gang. They caught up with them outside of town, and a gunfight ensued. However, the gang and Billy were able to escape. The spooky Hoyle Castle, reported to be haunted, sits on one end of the town. It was built in 1893 by a wealthy merchant, Watson Hoyle, for his fiancée, a mail-order bride from Massachusetts. Note the observation platform on top of the building, sometimes known as the infamous Widow's Walk. It was built for the young lady who never arrived in White Oaks. Hoyle was so heartsick that he never finished the inside of the home and reportedly sold the home and moved to Denver. However, some say his ghost still walks the halls of Hoyle's castle, waiting for his long-lost bride to arrive, a case of residual haunting attached to a building. Although today White Oaks is a ghost town, it still sees its fair share of visitors. Many come to visit the No Scum Allowed Saloon. Located at the northeast end of town, the saloon is housed in a very small building that was once an attorney's office and later an assay office for gold and silver. Locals have reported seeing strange orbs of light floating around between the saloon and the nearby schoolhouse. Others claim to have seen objects being mysteriously moved without explanation. There are even stories of chilling, disembodied voices being heard, and a man in a short-brimmed hat and overcoat who seemingly disappears into thin air. Perhaps it's the ghost of Billy the Kid. When Billy was killed by Pat Garrett, he was probably not ready to go into the white light, and that is why to this very day, people see him wandering around Lincoln, New Mexico. He has also been seen at the old jail at Lincoln. The sightings at the jail are most likely residual and not intelligent. Billy has also been sighted in other parts of New Mexico where he either lived or worked, including his grave. Another residual haunting occurs in our next ghost town. We had to drive well off the beaten path to find a hidden ghost town called Miner's Delight in the southeastern tip of the Wind River Range in Wyoming. When we arrived, we discovered the trailhead to the ghost town was appropriately marked by a haunted miners' cemetery. From there, the trail led to a gate, which opened, but must remain chained. The trail wound through an aspen pine forest, and after a fairly long walk, the first building appeared ahead. An ominous structure perched above a beaver pond, secluded and solitary. We were all alone. The path continued to clusters of completely abandoned buildings. We entered a cabin where a miner was murdered, and saw remnants of his belongings and furnishings. We felt like we were being watched as a gust of cold air swept through the cabin while the sun blistered high above. Back outside was clear. No tourists ever venture to Miner's Delight. If you want a ghost town all to yourself, and you're brave enough, this is the place. There is not a more isolated and creepy ghost town in the entire West.
Miner's Delight is northeast of Atlantic City, and it is completely unpopulated, and so it's a true ghost. And once there, you are in a pristine ghost town of very small size. It's called Miner's Delight is probably sarcasm, because Miner's Delight was an awful place to live because of these terrible Wyoming winters and so forth.
Gold was discovered here in 1868. The mine was located about a quarter-mile west of the town. Boom and bust periods followed the operation of the mine. In March 1882, the mine was completely shut down and not used again until after the turn of the 20th century. Eventually, everybody left, at least while they were alive. If you do not wish to be all alone in a very haunted town, you might like to head to Central City, Colorado. After the boom and bust of Central City, the town became a shadow of its former glory, its heyday long gone. But then, gambling came to the area and a new boom was underway.
Central City is an entirely different case because that was where people lived. People worked in Black Hawk, people lived in Central City. So it was you might say, the suburb in some respect. And a lot of work has been done by the Gilpin County Historical Society to preserve Central City. And they have a lot of preservation efforts going on. And certainly, yeah, there's been a few new casino buildings that are made to look old, things like that. But they're sitting, for the most part, on vacant lots. And so much of what was existed before gambling is still there today. As far as the homes, if you start walking up to High Street, and you visit some of those beautiful Victorian homes, they've been meticulously restored. The downtown area, the original buildings are all still there, dating back to the end of the mining era. So Central City's done an outstanding job of historic preservation, at least in my opinion.
And it is still rich with paranormal activity. If you travel to the Central City Masonic Cemetery, you may just come across a strange woman in black. Every April 5th and November 1st, it is said that an apparition clothed in a Victorian-style dress can be seen laying flowers at the grave of John Edward Cameron. Nobody knows whom the woman and John Cameron is. The cemetery is also known for its light anomalies and orbs, as are the hundreds of other mining towns' cemeteries. While the ghosts in Central City are nameless spirits, Shakespeare and St. Elmo are widely known to locals for their specific hauntings: Russian Bill and Annabelle Stark. Located in the Mojave Desert of New Mexico is a town called Shakespeare. An important stage stop in the late 1850s, it was abandoned when the mines closed in 1929. Billy the Kid used to wash dishes in Shakespeare's ill-reputed Stratford Hotel. Then, after the Civil War, gold was discovered in the surrounding hills.
Shakespeare, New Mexico is one of the absolutely premier ghost towns in the West. It's in an out-of-the-way location outside of Lordsburg, New Mexico, so you have to make a pilgrimage to it, if you will. But it has a very special history. It goes all the way, it goes through diamond swindles it was originally an Apache spring. And then when the Butterfield stage came through, It became a stage station, and the stage station still stands. That's what's special about it, is that there are several buildings that still stand there.
There was no law in Shakespeare. Only one rule was agreed upon. If you killed someone, you had to dig the grave. This kept down the number of indiscriminate shootings. The local silver mining company hired a group of men from Texas to look after their company interests and maintain order. They were known as the Vigilantes. Outlaw Russian Bill Tannenbaum was out rustling cattle on November 9, 1881, when he was caught and thrown in jail with his friend, Sandy King. The Vigilance Committee tried and convicted the men and sentenced them to be hanged. By the end of the night, the men were dragged from jail and brought to a makeshift courtroom in the dining hall of the Grant Hotel. Russian Bill begged for his life as the lynchmen began hanging ropes over the ceiling beam. Sandy requested a glass of water to quench his dry throat. Once King finished his water, the men were strung up by their necks and left to hang until they died. Their bodies were still dangling from the beam the next morning as a warning to all that Shakespeare would not tolerate criminals. Over the years, ghost hunters have flocked to Shakespeare and concentrated their ghost detecting efforts on the Grant Hotel, especially focusing on the room where dozens of men were hung, where today an eerie feeling is experienced by almost everyone.
The story is that Russian Bill haunts the area because he was murdered in the dining room. And in my photos, I've got some apparitions. I've been told they're sunspots or dust particles, but I choose to believe that they're ghosts. You see the green in the just next to the soot?
Yeah.
The other ones that I took 2 weeks ago is basically the same place, and then when I put it on the computer I could see green, a big green, a little purple, and then a smaller green. I say they're ghosts.
Orbs are thought to be spheres of energy that particularly show up in photographs or video. It is a commonly held belief that ghosts use energy to manifest themselves, which creates the orbs and other light anomalies. Just as Russian Bill haunts Shakespeare, the next town is known for its singular resident spirit. St. Elmo, Colorado, tucked away in the Rocky Mountains, is hard to get to, but well worth the effort. Originally named Forest City, this haunted ghost town is one of the best preserved relics of America's infamous gold rush period of the late 1800s. Founded in 1880, nearly 2,000 people settled in this town during its heyday, mining for gold and silver. When the ore ran out 40 years later, the railroad left 2 years after that, and then the people followed. After that, the town's survival depended largely on the presence of the Stark family, who remained the sole year-round occupants of the town through most of the early 20th century. Originally, Anton Stark, a rich cattleman, and his wife Anna took up residence in St. Elmo. Stark became a section boss for one of the local mines. He and Anna ran a general store in the Home Comfort Hotel, located on Poplar Street, St. Elmo's main business area. The general store also became the post office and the telegraph office. The Starks had 3 children, Tony, Roy, and Annabelle. All 3 grew up and worked in the town. In time, after buying up many of the buildings, they were the last residents. Annabelle, who was once described as a charming and attractive woman, was now cut off from the outside world with no plumbing or electricity, and she stopped taking care of herself and the buildings. The store and the hotel reeked of rotting food, tobacco, and garbage, So it's no wonder she was given the nickname Dirty Annie. Soon after the post office shut down, Annabelle was sent to a mental institution. She would die in a nursing home in 1960.
Annabelle is said, in legend, to continue to protect her town in death as she did in life. When she was alive, she was known to stand in front of her buildings with a shotgun and run people off. If she didn't know them, that was her property, her town, and her buildings. And she would threaten to shoot you. There are people today that say that she still appears at night holding that gun. Other people have said that they have seen her in a window in one of their old buildings upstairs, also holding a gun.
One report is children who were playing in the hotel were startled when all the windows and doors slammed shut and the temperature dropped nearly 20 degrees. Another was a terrified visitor noticed a woman in a white dress standing behind a window of the empty hotel. Kurt James is a published author of the book Rocky Mountain Reckoning. He penned the following poem. Annabelle Stark. She walks out of the shadows when the day turns dark. St. Elmo's only full-time resident is Annabelle Stark. She was born, raised, lived, and breathed. This was her town. Never thought of leaving, even when the gold mine shut down. Dirty Annie, a nickname given as she grew older and aged, never bathing in tangled hair as mental illness raged. Known to patrol the dusty streets with a pistol and shotgun, year in and year out, as her afflicted mind became undone. In the year of our Lord, 1960, Dirty Annie fell ill and she died. Some say at night in St. Elmo that her ghost still resides. Today, one of the most intact privately owned ghost boomtowns, St. Elmo consists of over 40 antique structures. A dirt road and a boardwalk, 2 churches, and numerous minor cabins. Although Annabelle didn't die here, her menacing spirit still lingers. Such is the case in Comet, where trapped souls still remain. The ghosts of Comet, Montana beckoned, so we made the 4.5-mile drive down Orr Road, wondering if there would be anything left for us to find. Then, in front of us, rose the ghost town's first building. Comet was still there. We proceeded through the rugged old roads of this once booming mining town. We were alone.
My first impression of Comet as far as the supernatural was that there may be something there. And maybe that's because of the buildings being in such decay, kind of gives you that extra feel of a ghostliness. You know it's not going to be there much longer, and maybe that the spirits are crying out, save our town. The hotel especially, and around the hotel, kind of felt a heaviness in the air.
The area felt hostile and threatening. The whole town seemed angry and dangerous. The decaying buildings were a chilling sight. As time moves on, the streets of Comet continue to rot.
I'd have to say a place like Comet, Montana would rate as one of my favorites too, because it is so intact and with one resident, and that's just a caretaker. It's like the people just walked away. There's still furniture in those houses, and being able to walk in those buildings and really see what it was like when there's still furniture there, and there's still, it gets my imagination running. You know, why didn't they just walk away? Where'd they go? What were these people like? Well, this was a nice house. Why would they just leave? Why did they leave their stove? Why did they leave their bed?
In 1876, the town was plotted and surveyed. It consisted of 12 blocks laid along 3 east-west streets and 3 north-south streets. 1 year later, the Comet Post Office opened. The Comet mine was barely profitable through the rest of the decade and narrowly weathered the silver panic and depression of 1893. The mine was sold several times in the early 1900s. Although most precious metals had been mined out by then, the mine continued to produce valuable lead, zinc, and iron. During these prosperous years, Comet boasted more saloons, 22, than the school had children, 20. In 1926, the Basin Montana Tunnel Company took over the mine and built a 200-ton flotation mill ore concentrator. At the time, the mill was called the most modern in Montana. Mining continued at Comet through the Great Depression, employing about 50 men, and was considered the largest mining venture in Montana outside of Butte. However, after World War II, the mine closed forever, and the town became a ghost. Today, the best structures are the residences on the hill. The fabulous mill and 2-story dormitory, and the haunted 2-story boarding house. It appears the spirits aren't the only ones watching over the town.
It does have a sort of unofficial caretaker, and I'm glad. There is in this town one, like a double wide mobile home. And I knew he was watching me the whole time. And I'm grateful for that, because I mean no harm, and I'm only taking pictures. But if I had taken out something like an axe or something, he'd have been there in a big hurry. But it's absolutely, it's vulnerable, but it's beautiful.
We were told to watch our backs, as the local caretaker would do anything to protect the town, including using his shotgun. In the end, we heeded the warning and chose not to exit our vehicles, our crew on edge and anxious to leave. Dread could be felt throughout the entire town, and the creepiness was similar to that of a haunted house that says, "Do not enter." So, we left for 2 ghost towns that were a little more welcoming. Premier locations for multiple hauntings, places of eerie bliss for ghost hunters. Often, ghost towns come in pairs. One the fancy and haughty town of the mine owners, the other the pedestrian town of the workers. Such is the case with Cripple Creek and Victor, twin boom towns in Colorado's Rocky Mountains. Both towns boomed as the surrounding Cripple Creek mining district quickly became the most productive gold mining district in the United States. Mining is still part of the economy more than 100 years after its founding in 1891. Nicknamed the City of Gold Mines, Victor, a semi-ghost town, is one of the best preserved mining camps in Colorado, and today it remains one of the showcases of the mining era in Colorado.
Victor, Colorado is one of my favorite ghost towns because it might be the best city ghost town I can name. What I mean by that is it is not a rural place at all. It has multi-story buildings in it, it has brick, it has concrete, it has paved streets. it was a town of great riches. I like it because, first of all, it is in marked contrast to its sister city, which is Cripple Creek. They were both gold discoveries that came at an absolutely terrific time for the state of Colorado. It was right after the silver crash of 1893, which knocked out places like Leadville, Silverton, and others, and miners were just left devastated because the price of silver, it just absolutely plummeted. And gold was then found in Cripple Creek and the surrounding area. And great cities were built, both Cripple Creek and Victor.
I like the old saying that Cripple Creek gets the glory, that Victor gets the gold. Cripple Creek was always bigger than Victor. It was always the main town. It was always the one that everybody heard about. But Victor did always have the gold. All of the biggest mines were always in Victor. And the most ore was always brought out of Victor. Even though Cripple Creek did well too, Victor did better. At once upon a time, those two cities, two towns, just located 5 miles apart, had some 50,000 people living in those two places. Amazing for way back in the 1890s. When the Woods brothers, who were the undisputed founders of Victor, went to build the Victor Hotel, which was badly needed at the time, as they were digging the foundation, what did they find? Gold. There was gold to be found everywhere in Victor. So they found a new lot to build the hotel on, and they put right there in the middle of downtown a gold mine, which produced millions and millions of dollars over the next several years.
Victor is the poor stepchild, and I find it absolutely charming. It has a wonderful firehouse and city hall. It has a bank building that is now a terrific hotel with an operating old elevator. It has the Lowell Thomas Museum, which has lots of artifacts from somebody that I vaguely knew, and people younger than I don't even know at all, but he was a major citizen of Victor and was a radio star in the 1940s, I would say, 1940s and 50s.
Victor and Cripple Creek offer a myriad of hauntings for a full ghost hunter's experience. The Lowell Thomas Museum is one of the most haunted places in Victor. Ralph was part of a ghost hunters team that investigated the old museum.
So, this is the Lowell Thomas room. A lot of the stuff that's in here is both his father's and Lowell Thomas's itself. When we were in here last, just as we were preparing to leave, we decided to come in here and do an EVP session. We had lined up all of our sensors here because they didn't really want us on the rugs here. Though we didn't get any photographic or video evidence, every time we asked a question, we either had an EMF spike or a temperature shift. The questions that gave us positive responses were not about Lowell Thomas, but actually about his father, which is really unexpected. But it was a fun experience because all of a sudden we had gone from a very quiet couple of hours to coming in here and asking questions about the city of Victor and what he did here and the types of patients that he may have had, and if this was actually used as a medical facility at any point. And we know that it wasn't, and we didn't get any positive hits for this as a hospital of any kind up here. But we definitely got some good voices out of this, and we do have some EVPs from here.
The Victor Hotel was once a boarding house for miners. Once, a miner named Eddie left his room and pressed the button to call the elevator. The gates opened, and Eddie stepped in. Unbeknownst to him, the elevator car had not arrived, and he fell to a gruesome death below. This room is now a popular location for ghost hunters who are brave enough to sleep in it. In addition, Victor also has a spooky cemetery associated with it. As for Cripple Creek, there are several haunted locations within the town. What was once the Teller County Jail has reports of dark laughter coming from its solitary confinement cell, as well as sightings of small children and strange noises recorded on audio tapes. The famously haunted Imperial Hotel is frequented by the original owner, George Long, and his daughter, Alice. Bartender of the Red Rooster at the hotel, Mark Gregory, tells the story.
The oldest story, of course, is George and Alice. Okay, they were the original owners. George was the original owner of the hotel in 1894. This room we're in right now was the living quarters for the hotel owners in that time period. George married his first cousin from Denver, and they had a daughter, Alice. Alice was a special needs person. Unfortunately, at that time, there wasn't facilities in Cripple Creek for those people, so they would keep her locked up in this room. Now, stories are that at night you can hear her rattling the doors, wanting to get out. And the story that I was told is back in the kitchen area is the original staircase down to the basement. And one day, Alice got out of the room. The story is that she found George going down the staircase. She hit him over the head with a frying pan. He tumbled down the stairs, broke his neck, and died.
At Maggie's restaurant at the Colorado Grand Casino and Hotel, you may see Maggie herself in her period clothing. Finally, at the Hotel St. Nicholas, another ghostly miner, along with a boy known as Pete, often steals cigarettes and other items from guests. All this hair-raising activity going on at the St. Nicholas is attributed to when the hotel was a mental ward of a hospital. And for one of the hotel's ghosts, you might just smell it before you see it. Named Stinky, this apparition stands behind a staircase and is often preceded by a sewage-like stench. There are multiple ways you can experience the paranormal. Some, like Stinky, manifest themselves through smells. It's not uncommon to get a whiff of perfume or tobacco smoke that has no source. Others see spirits as misty forms, shadow figures, or as a fully formed human. Some experience them through sound, knocks, footsteps, even talking. There are reports of the dead physically touching someone by tapping an arm or pulling hair, or creating cold spots in an otherwise warm area. And finally, there is the emotional component. It's been said that ghosts can cause feelings of anxiousness, or transfer their feelings and physical ailments to a living being, such as sadness, or, for example, the stomach pain they felt before their death. In Victor and Cripple Creek, you can experience all of these forms of ghostly communication. But in terms of the most overall haunted places where you can still live in and enjoy as a tourist, Georgetown and Silver Plume are the crown jewel. Silver. Silver that showed up in silvery plumes in the quartz veins above the present-day town, hence the name Silver Plume. At midday, there is virtually no one on the streets. Yet, 130 years ago, this miner's town had packed into its narrow streets saloons, butcher shops, and mercantiles. However, Silver Plume's prosperity was short-lived, devastated by the silver crash of 1893. its growth and prosperity came to an end. Today, it is a 19th century ghost town frozen in time. Covering a minuscule 2/10 of an acre, the town's many Victorian-era historic buildings crowd Main Street, including the church and the old schoolhouse on the west end of town. On the east end of town, the gentle walk up the mine tailings leads to an old mine head frame and a wonderful view of Silver Plume. But would you want to live in a haunted town? Both Silver Plume and Georgetown have their myriad of ghostly secrets. If you walk through Silver Plume today, you can still feel the uneasiness of its past residents. It was plagued by fires, and one Paddy Barracks was burned to death by a fire started in his saloon. The Windsor Hotel is inhabited by the ghost of a 19th century miner who likes to rearrange guests' personal belongings and move about the B&B in the quiet hours of the morning. A little girl is said to haunt the gazebo next to the small town hall. People have heard things being thrown or seen a little girl in blue playing with dolls that was there one second and gone the next. And then, if you were to walk in Silver Plume at night, you might just hear the forlorn sound of a violin. One miner, Clifford Griffin, had come west to escape from his previous life of tragedy. On the eve of his wedding, his fiancée had been found dead. After the hard work in the mines, he would retire to whiskey and his violin on a ridge high above Silver Plume. Each night, the townsfolk would flock outdoors to hear his solemn tune. And one day, as the last note of his violin rang out, a gunshot did as well. He was found dead with a bullet through his heart and burial instructions nearby. Today, you can still make the hike to his graveside, and some say, hear the echo of his haunting violin. Georgetown came into existence in 1864 with the discovery of silver in the hills along Clear Creek. When the mine opened, it was the first in Colorado where the principal ore was silver, not gold. It was here that the mine owners lived. By 1870, there were 800 residents in Georgetown. 10 years later, that number had risen to over 3,000. However, after the disastrous silver crash in 1893, Georgetown began a slow decline.
Georgetown is another city that's very, very lucky, because when they came in based on recreation, skiing, and so forth, they built the condominiums to the east of the original town and left the original town very much intact. In fact, it's got its original fire stations, and they're very picturesque. It's got its original community building. It's got its original stores. It's got its original Parisian-style hotel. And so the core of the city was left intact, restored, and is a wonderful place to visit today with shops and stores and so forth. And then all of the new development was put outside that core portion. And then, so again, Georgetown is very, very lucky because it retains that Victorian flavor. And it was where the mining people lived. It's where the mine owners lived. It's where the wealthy people lived. And the workers lived up there at Silver Plume.
To connect the two mining towns, the railroad's builders designed a corkscrew route that traveled twice the distance, slowly gaining more than 600 feet in elevation. The route included horseshoe curves, grades of up to 4%, and 4 bridges across Clear Creek, including the massive Devil's Gate High Bridge. Georgetown is one of the most haunted semi-ghost towns of the West. Max and Jan McCollum discovered this for themselves when they opened Georgetown Jerky and Emporium a female ghost haunting their store.
We've had a couple of people that walking down the sidewalk and then just stop in their tracks, have that feeling that there's a spirit in there. So they come in, and both of them said the same place towards the back of the store in front of our vault. And it's a female that worked at the bank back in the day. She has no bad feelings.
Well, we have never actually seen her, but we have had a few little bits of evidence that she's around. Possibly had something to do with the bank that used to be here, so maybe she's protecting the bank. And a couple of instances, somebody has come in and this has happened a couple of times, have, you know, the hair stand up on the back of their neck, or chills, or maybe some nauseousness.
Right here's where she is. And had a fella come in. He was really nice guy, and he's one of the two people that stopped out front. And I talked to him for quite a while, and then he asked me if he could bring some divining rods in. I said, sure, go ahead. So he brought a divining rod in one hand. And so he started here, and he got right here, and it just did a 90. Came from back here to right here, and it did a 90. Came from the back room, came right here, and it did a 90. And I said, well, being you got her and all, ask her if she likes the jerky store. And it did a 90. I said, ask her if she likes the people that own the jerky store, and it did a 90. I said, I'm good.
A friend made a connection with the mystery lady.
Her mother was very ill, and she was having a lot of emotional stress, and so she stood right here, and all of a sudden she just had this wave of dizziness and lightheadedness, nauseousness, and I was right here, and she put her hand on my shoulder, and immediately it transferred from her to me, and it just hit me like, oh my gosh, I might fall over. And it left her, and so we both kind of went, well, that was weird, and so at that instance I just kind of thought maybe that was her.
We haven't had anything move or anything or any. I say hey to her occasionally, walking through, you know, ask her how she's doing.
The light switch is on sometimes when we come in, which we feel like we turned it out at night.
Robert Nix, who owns the Flippin' Flea with his girlfriend, has had some paranormal experiences of his own.
I worked on the fire department for a time, and one of my colleagues on the fire department told me about a lady who had at one time lived here, and she was suffering from dementia. And she got, you know, she would wander off like a lot of them people will do. At one point in the wintertime, middle of winter, she went outside in the middle of the night when it was bitter cold, and she slipped off the porch out front here and broke her hip and died. I mean, she died to the elements that night, you know. And when we moved in here, I was always kind of surprised. Like, I would come in the middle of the night, the front door would be hanging open. And I always thought it was one of our neighbors, or I thought maybe we left it unlatched, or, you know, all the little things that you think, like, oh, I left the door open, that was stupid. But, you know, as I got to playing with it more and more, I noticed that the door really doesn't, it's not like it's just barely latched. It latches, and it would always happen in the middle of the night. Like, I was working at a job where I had to go to work at 4 in the morning, and I would come down at 4 in the morning, and it'd be below zero, like, you know, it'd be 10, 15 below zero. The snow would be all the way into the hallway over there, and I'd be like, what the hell, you know, like, this is ridiculous.
Built in 1867, the Hamill House is one of the most haunted places in Georgetown. The Hamill family made their wealth in the local silver mining business. As soon as the price of silver plummeted, the house went into decline, although the majority of its original fixtures, furniture, and wallpaper remain today. Now owned by the local historical society, many strange occurrences are said to have taken place in the house.
William Arthur Hamill's, I think it was his brother-in-law, and Hamill wound up taking the house over from him. He kind of maybe had some financial troubles, left. And one of the ghost investigations that I heard of specifically said he is around the house, he is not happy, you know, it was his house, and it kind of became his brother-in-law's house or whatever, and you know, he's kind of one of the crabbier presences that it might be there. It was a boarding house, it has its own history. I've even been a part of a ghost investigation there. A couple of things were kind of like, yeah, you know, what is that? Like, that's kind of odd. We had some EVPs that were like, seems like they're almost talking to you, you know. I always used to feel like at the top of the stairs there, which is by Priscilla's room, always felt kind of unwelcome. Like I'd be cleaning, especially at night, you know, I'd feel like just that kind of not really welcome here, hair's prickling a little bit.
Anne Marie Cannon, who operates Silver Queen walking and ghost tours, shares her experience.
So there's been several movies that have been filmed in Georgetown in the Hamill House, and one of them, I don't know if it's been released yet. It was in post-production. It was a horror film. It's called For the Living. And so my job when they were doing it was to basically be here in the house and telling them, you know, don't touch that, don't do that, or if they needed anything, I would help them. They had a question about moving something or something like that. The woman who was one of the lead actresses, she was an opera singer, and she was going to be doing a scene where she had to sing opera. And it was rainy. It wasn't very nice outside, and she asked me if she could come into the house and practice. So I was downstairs, and I said, yeah, sure, why don't you come up here and go into Priscilla's room. And she came up here, and I was sitting downstairs, and I heard her voice, it was breathtaking to hear someone singing opera in the house. And so there was that vibrational element, I think. And she came back down when she was done practicing and said that she saw a woman going by the door with white skirts. And that's been a theme, that's been a story that people have talked about in this house and seeing that. Another story is that there was an executive director who worked here. This was years ago, and she had young children, and her office was over there. She would bring her children to work because she could, and she was working at her desk, and her son was looking out the window up there over to the house, and he said to her, "Mommy, who is that woman in the window up there?" And so she got up and she looked, and she saw what she described as a fluttering of skirts.
If you're brave enough, you can tour the house today. The historic saloon, once known as Café Prague, is supposedly haunted by a man who shot his opponent during a poker game.
Two gentlemen, they were gambling all day, drinking all day, and they were gambling over a can of oysters is how the story goes. And this was in the Denver paper. We've actually found the articles in the local papers. It's there. Might not be, I guess, politically correct. He was half black, and he was known to have a very bad temper. And the article says that crazy coon shot him in the face, you know. And of course the town, that's one of the ones where the town took him, strung him up. He is around, allegedly, still hangs around there, and one of the ghost investigations had him saying, "I didn't do it, it wasn't me." Like he's another one, he's like angry. That's his name though. They were asking if it was him, and that was what they were getting the hits on. The gentleman that he shot lived, and that's the weird thing. The ball, I guess, the paper article says the ball, you know, lodged in his skull. I don't know if it like bounced. You know, the old-fashioned big heavy lead slugs. A lot of times they would go straight through, but sometimes they kind of hit and just kind of ricochet around. So the guy that he shot didn't die, and is that why he feels he was ripped off?
This is one of 2 hangings known to have occurred in Georgetown, and the locals say the men are still seen walking the streets. Visitors and staff at the 1875 Hotel de Paris Museum have reported many paranormal experiences, possibly due to the fact that the hotel contains 90% of its original furnishings. We were invited by the executive director, Kevin Kuharic, to perform the first ghost investigation conducted there.
Alan?
Kevin?
Hi.
Nice to meet you. This is Anna.
Hey, Anna. Nice to see you. And this is Anne Marie Cannon. She's with Silver Queen Ghost Tours.
After a preliminary discussion, Kevin suggested we focus on the 2 bedrooms where people have died. But first, he gave us a tour.
Happy to take you through. So why don't we just go this direction? And this is the 1878 commercial kitchen. And the person who was cooking back here was Louis Dupuis, the host, the chef, the proprietor of Hotel de Paris. He was 31 years old when he opened Hotel de Paris. He was known as the best cook in the Colorado Territory. And he eventually became known as the father of domestic science, or home economics as we know it today.
I think that the one thing that is just, in the fabric of this building is Louis. Louis Dupuis was larger than life, and he is a one person in history in this town that I really get a sense of.
Yeah, I'm sure. I feel really comfortable in here, but I could feel like Louis could come walking around the corner at any minute. It does kind of feel like he's still around here,
Would you like to see his bedroom and private quarters?
Sure.
Let's go there and see it. And this is Louis' bedroom, office, private bath, and study over there. So in August of 1900, he gets sick, and he had been taking ice-cold baths in this tub right here. He felt that was bracing and it was good for muscle tone, but he's told by his doctor, no ice-cold baths until you're well. Well, over the course of 5 weeks, he gets worse. It turns into pneumonia, and he then begins to feel a little bit better. He feels he's pulled through, so he decides he's going to go against doctor's orders. So he takes an ice-cold bath, doesn't feel well, crawls into his bed, shouts out, "Sophie, bring me cold champagne," and dies unexpectedly.
Can we pull the bed down?
Sure, why don't you help me do that?
Sure.
Okay. So this bed was made in Burlington, Iowa, and it's called a cabinet bed. So it appears to be an armoire during the day, but at night it unfolds into a bed. So this is where Louis slept, and this is also where he passed away.
We headed upstairs to where someone else died in the hotel.
So now we're in room 3, which was Sophie Galley, the housekeeper's room. She was a shirt-tail relative of Louis Dupuis. She died in this room in this bed. She was suffering from paracentesis, an accumulation of fluids in her body cavity, maybe around her heart or around her organs. She dies in February 1901. Now that we're a museum, it's no longer an active hotel and restaurant. We're using the building in a different way. I'm curious whether people, if their spirits are here, are confused by what we're doing, or if they approve of what we're doing, which we hope they do. And so those are things that concern us. We want them to know that we love it and we're taking care of it for them.
As darkness fell over the hotel, we headed for Louis' room first and gathered our equipment, including a REM pod, which detects electromagnetic fields, an ovulus that uses environmental measurements to produce words.
Hold. Hold. Chest. Wrong. Knife.
And flashlights for spirits to interact with.
Let's see if we can find the light switch.
Kevin, I think that you should walk by and see if it says anything.
Remember.
That's an interesting thing to say.
Scruple.
Scruple.
Haze. Papa. Calm. Cold. Vague.
So whenever we walk by, it says, what do you think that's about?
I'm not sure. I don't recall it doing that regularly like that before. Okay, so this is the bed where Louis took his last breath. If you're still here, do you want to come visit us and come sit on your bed so we can tell that you're here? This is an amazing place you have.
You can come by the REM pod, you can touch the REM pod, you can go over there, touch a flashlight.
Let me try. Do you have an EVP here?
Sure.
We used a voice recorder to capture electronic voice phenomenon, or EVPs.
Okay, Louis, so we're here next to your bed where you took your last breath. If there's any spirits here, Louis or otherwise, can you please say your name for us? Can you indicate whether did you die here? Is there any other spirits that might be here?
What year is it?
We played back the recording, but there were no spirit voices. We tried to use our spirit box, which generates white noise that allows voices to come through.
Can you say your name?
Mike, Tesla.
Tesla. Tesla?
Tesla came. That's right.
He did?
With some interesting words from the Ovulus that resonated with Kevin, we headed to Sophie's room.
He thinks of you as the son he never had.
Oh, wow.
So when that word popped up, that was like...
Well, and the word scruple, because that's really important for Kevin to know that
to get it right,
being
to
scrupulous.
do it right.
And then it said truth, which is important to him as well.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
That he's getting the story truthfully right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're here in Sophie's room, and Sophie, did you just turn off a flashlight? Okay, so we're here in Sophie's room, and Sophie, did you just turn off a flashlight?
Did it just go off?
It did just go off, this one.
We decided to use the spirit box again.
Communicate with us?
Flashlight just went on.
Okay. If this is you, Sophie, can you turn the flashlight back on? We'd like to know you're here.
Is that you, Sophie?
What year is it?
It sounds like the same music or something.
Kinda does.
Kevin and Anne-Marie joined us in the dining room for a final investigation.
I think this would be the most colorful and the most public of all the rooms in the hotel.
So is there any spirits that still linger here today because you had good memories and good times here? If you could come forward near the table here and maybe touch this device or come closer.
After being quiet throughout the whole investigation, the REM pod goes off.
Drive.
Someone here?
Watch Anna's reaction.
Louis, is that you?
There's like a different kind of thing.
Really?
Yeah.
Someone here?
A few seconds later, it goes off again. Kevin has a strong reaction.
Is this Louis?
That was interesting.
Yeah, sometimes that's all you get.
It's been quiet this whole time until just now.
We settled into our final report of the hotel to Kevin.
Though we didn't have any, I don't think, maybe direct interactions, we did have some interesting things on the Ovilus, some words that kind of connected with the building and with you.
Overall, I would say felt very peaceful and comfortable being in here. Nothing negative or anything like that. No indications towards that.
The most common question is the hotel haunted? So how do you think I should respond to people after having had this experience tonight?
Well, it sounds like there's definitely something going on because of everyone's experiences. But I think you could definitely say that it is more of a friendly sort of haunting and more of a residual, not an intelligent sort of haunting.
So it is a place that I think is happy and peaceful and quiet.
Yeah, it definitely feels warm and inviting and a place that I want to stay. I don't feel like I want to run out of here. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I kind of don't feel like I'm alone here. There's just that sense that things are still happening that we just can't hear and see.
There are many other ghost towns across the Mountain West, each with their own remarkable story to tell. Every ghost town we visited had reports and experiences of paranormal activity. Activities ranging from single to multiple hauntings, to residual presences, to intelligent spirits. Shadows lurk around every corner. Ghostly sounds echo through halls. And phantom smells linger in the air. There is no better place than these towns to have your own paranormal experience. Whether ghosts truly linger or visit these crumbling structures or not, these abandoned towns are a treasure to behold. You can still feel the last thread of life that once permeated these remnants of the past. Even if you deny the presence of the paranormal, hear the laughter of school children and envision an old saloon filled with its patrons. It is important to remember the history, the people. It is our hope their stories never be forgotten. And through interest in the paranormal, these buildings may just be preserved for generations to come. So, visit these iconic pieces of Americana. Test your paranormal sensitivity for the experience of a lifetime. If you dare.